So we're back from break and we're moving into respiratory and digestive systems, quickly going through both. Yesterday in class, you labeled the respiratory system, and if not, we'll do digestive systems today. But I wanted to briefly take you through the pathway, then, how air travels into the lungs for oxygen and CO2 exchange. So here we have this first diagram of the head, and you've already labeled this. Air is going to come into, I'll draw some arrows. Air is going to come into the nose, into the nasal cavity. Where back here you have some little ridged cartilage areas. You also have mucous membranes that line this, and they're going to filter out, remember, bacteria and other allergens and things like that that could cause a problem. Then the air is going to go down through the back of the throat. The back of the throat is called the pharynx or pharynx, and you already have that labeled too. Right about here, it's going to hit your larynx or voice box, which is right here. I should come over here a little bit. Your larynx. This is going to cause you to have your voice. Then the air is going to travel. Notice we have two ways to go here. This tube behind is the esophagus. This tube is the trachea, which, like I said, you had before. The esophagus is a muscular tube that's going to be involved in digestion. The trachea is a cartilaginous tube with cartilage rings with which air travels down. So we're going to take it down through there. We're going to go into this tube. And at this point, you still have some mucous membranes. Anytime you have a passageway that's connected to the outside, they're going to be lined with mucous membranes in order to connect bacteria and things like that. So let me go to this picture. Here's our trachea, a better view of our trachea with those cartilaginous rings. And we're now, you notice, in the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity is separated from the abdominal cavity by the diaphragm. And let's go ahead, I'm going to use a text for this. Let's go ahead, even though it's not on your list, let's label diaphragm. That is this thin muscle right here. And in class, we'll demonstrate exactly how that works. But when this muscle contracts, it's going to flatten, go down a little bit, and then air is going to fill the lung sacs. So back to our path of the air. Let's say this has happened. The diaphragm has contracted and it's moved down. Now we've got more space. We've got a pressure gradient. So now air is going to come in. It's going to come in through the trachea, and then it's going to split into the two bronchi. Bronchus singular, bronchi plural. And I'm just going to go to this side, which should be your left lung. Remember, it's always the opposite of what you're looking at. It's a mirror image. Now we're going to go down into the bronchi. And the bronchi are going to split into smaller bronchioles. And I will label this for us. Oops. Try it again. Bronchioles. Those are the smaller tubes that the air then goes through. So everything, pretty much, air is just traveling through a tube. Then we get to our final destination. Yep, okay. And I believe I'll have a picture of this for you later. Down here, at the end of all of these, there are little microscopic sacs. We'll look at these more closely in class. These microscopic sacs are called alveoli. Alveolus, singular, alveoli, plural. The alveoli are little sacs, like I said, little clusters of sacs. They look like almost little clusters of grapes. And they have a very moist surface. And what happens at this moist surface is they are surrounded by little capillaries where the oxygen from the alveoli that's come through this path diffuses into the capillaries. CO2 from the capillaries diffuses into the alveoli for you to exhale. So that's our anatomy of the respiratory system. Let's move right on to your next diagram, which is the digestive system. We're going to do this pretty much in the same way. Here's our nasal cavity, here's our trachea going into the bronchi, and your two lungs then will be filled with those little sacs called alveoli. Digestive system, for this part at least, runs right alongside of it. So let's look at our parts that you've labeled again. Food comes through the mouth, where there are three pairs of salivary glands that produce your spit. Now, as you know, your spit has a role in digestion. It's a role in the chemical digestion. I'm going to type that in here now. There's two types of digestion that are going on. One is physical. I'm actually going to call that mechanical. Mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. Mechanical digestion is the breaking down of food into smaller pieces done by your teeth. Chemical digestion begins in the mouth with the saliva from the salivary glands. And we will see in a lab that what you're doing is you're breaking down starches. Starches start to be digested by the saliva in your spit. And you make this ball of food called a bolus. And I'm sure you've seen a bolus. It's just this gooped together ball of food. You want it to be in smallest pieces as possible because you don't want to swallow something too big. We come down to here, and now we have our juncture. We have in front the trachea and in back the esophagus. There is a little muscular flap here, and you don't have to know it, but I'll just mention it. A little muscular flap here, cartilaginous flap called the epiglottis. And the epiglottis, when you swallow your food, closes the trachea, so the food goes down the esophagus. When you're breathing air, it doesn't matter because air can go down your esophagus. It might cause you to burp. But you want to cover that trachea when you're swallowing your food. Because, of course, any solid objects down here can block the trachea, and you'll know what happens. You choke. So let's say this epiglottis closes. The food's going to go down then the esophagus. This is the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube. No digestion occurs here. That's extremely important. No digestion occurs here. It is simply like a tube where you're going to muscle squeeze and you're going to move the food down the path. All right, then we enter the stomach. Here's the stomach right here. What happens in the stomach? The stomach is very acidic, very low pH, a lot of hydrochloric acid. Proteins get broken down, and some starches too, but mainly protein digestion occurs in the stomach. Then the food goes from the stomach into the small intestine. Why is it the small intestine when it's longer? Because it's a smaller diameter. So let's see if I can trace this. In the small intestine, there are three parts. The first part, the duodenum or duodenum, is the first 10 inches. So it's really up here. This is where most of your digestion occurs. I'm going to type this in. Okay. Duodenum. Everything gets digested. Okay. Your pancreas, right here, remember your pancreas? Your pancreas secretes digestive enzymes. Not only does it secrete hormones, it secretes digestive enzymes into the duodenum, which help break down carbs, lipids, and proteins. Then the rest of your small intestine is involved in absorption. Now, what does absorption mean? Absorption is diffusion of the nutrients that have been broken down into their monomers. Remember you talked about in freshman bio, polysaccharides become monosaccharides, proteins become amino acids. When it's in the monomers, those get absorbed into the bloodstream and then taken to cells all over the body. So the small intestine is extremely important in absorption. The last thing then it goes into, so now pretty much everything's been digested and absorbed. The nutrients have been taken to the cells where they're needed. Now you go to the large intestine. With the large intestine, pretty much what happens here is water reabsorption. So you got this gooey, sticky, watery fluid that goes into your large intestine. It goes up here, then across, and then down. Large intestine is also called colon. So let's don't forget that. Because if you have a colonoscopy, you're scoping out the colon, making sure everything's okay. It's got an ascending part, a transverse part, and a descending part. When things are going through the colon, by this point again, all the nutrients have been digested. There's some vitamin synthesis that occurs here, but mainly it's water reabsorption. So water is going to get reabsorbed back into the body. Then you get to this final little area right here that I'm going to have you put in called the rectum. And I'm sure you've heard of this. It's the rectum. This is a little area where the feces, or what's left over, is going to be stored. And then, of course, it passes out through the anus. Okay? Our last step in this, I wanted to magnify. We have some accessory organs here. This, of course, is the liver. This is the gallbladder. And then here's our duodenum. Notice the first part of the small intestine. And here's our pancreas. I said that a lot of the digestive enzymes are made in the pancreas and dumped because it's right here into the duodenum where it's broken down. Well, the liver, what does the liver do? The liver's primary function, besides some of the things we talked about before, breakdown of red blood cells, is to produce bile. It also, let's say, processes toxins in the body. So the liver is extremely important. But for digestive purposes, it produces bile. What does bile do? Bile helps to emulsify fats. You know, your blood and most of your body is water, and as we know, lipids do not dissolve in water. So the bile it coats the fats and allows them to become water soluble. The bile is secreted by the liver and stored in the gallbladder. Then, when the time comes, a little bit of it is released into the duodenum along with pancreatic juices. This is what gives it, along with that broken down bilirubin, too. It's what gives your poop the brownish color because bile is kind of a greenish brown, and then it passes through. So that was a real quick overview of the respiratory and digestive systems. We'll go over them again in class and answer questions, but that's about it, and I'll see you in class tomorrow.